David, you all set? Great. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the final session of the day. We've got 3 great talks lined up for you. The first one by David Shea on Bitcoin staking. So, David, all yours.
All right. So, can people hear me? Great. So I get to give the talk right after lunch, or not immediately after lunch, but so I'll try my best. Okay. So what's happening here? Not this one. Okay. So Bitcoin staking is the topic. So I'm a co-founder of Babylon, a startup project, and Bitcoin staking is the main protocol that we're working on. And today, I would like to do 2 things in this talk. First, I would like to introduce the general concept of Bitcoin staking and give a little bit update on where we are in terms of the project. But 2, the more important thing is that actually we come across, as we work on this protocol, quite an interesting problem in the intersection of crypto economic security and tokenomics. So I'm hoping to get some of you interested so that we can work together. This is a problem in progress that we're working on. So that's the goal of today's talk. Okay, so before we talk about Bitcoin staking, we should talk about staking. And staking is actually a very exciting development in the crypto space. Proof-of-stake networks have been a relatively recent phenomenon, I would say a few years. Even Ethereum, the merge has only happened about 2 years ago. However, there is already a huge staking market that has emerged. Staking asset of the top chains about of the order of half a trillion, a lot of value staked, a lot of rewards being given of the orders of tens of billions. And you can see that there's a flourishing market in staking, around staking. And so why do you ask that this is a phenomenon? Well, I'll argue from a security point of view, proof-of-stake security is actually quite interesting. As we all know, proof-of-stake security is a way of offering security to blockchains. Blockchains is an alternative to proof of work. And the main security guarantee of a proof-of-stake networks that's actually quite unique to proof-of-stake is the notion of slashability. Slashability, that is, the stake that secure a chain is like a collateral, and it ensures good behaviors of the validator in the sense that if the validators misbehave, then the stake gets slashed. So it's a collateral, and that is the very strong form of security. So that's on one side. But on the other side, which is less discussed in the academic community, is this notion that not only you provide strong security to the chain you're securing, you are also providing strong security to the stakers. Look, the stakers are the ones providing capital, so you have to treat them well. And proof-of-stake protocols treat them quite well, in a sense that the security is trustless. So most proof-of-stake networks, you do not need to trust a third party to provide staking. For example, if you stake your 32 ETH on Ethereum, you are not giving those 32 ETH to Vitalik and ask Vitalik to help you to stake. There's no Vitalik in the middle, and it's completely trustless through the smart contract. And so that is very good, because a lot of ways people earn yield is actually trusted. You lose money, lenders, people go away, disappear, projects disappear, but staking is trustless. And I think that's one reason why this dramatic growth of the staking market. Okay, so that's the background. However, there is one pretty significant drawback of proof-of-stake security, and that's the cost of security, okay? So if you look at some example blockchains, proof-of-stake blockchains here, from Ethereum, Matic, Atom, Osmosis, Polkadot, etc., you will see that to provide the yield, you're asking people to provide security, you better pay them back something. And that usually comes from, a significant part comes from inflation of the token. And as you see here, that for lots of proof-of-stake blockchain, the inflation rate is rather significant, of the order of 10% or more, especially for smaller proof-of-stake networks. And if you tell me that you are inflating the US dollar by 10, 20% every year, I don't think you would like to live in this country, maybe not. So inflation is a problem. Inflation is a problem. Inflation is mortgaging the future for the present. And so this cost of security is one of the biggest problems I find in proof-of-stake networks. Okay. Now, this leads me to the topic of the session. What is the name of the session? It's called restaking, okay? And if you think about the concept of restaking, okay, the concept of restaking has multiple aspects, but today I'd like to focus on one aspect, which is the idea that security of a network, of a proof-of-stake network, does not need actually to be provided by the native asset only, okay? So in fact, this concept of remote staking, shall we say, to be more specific, has been around for quite a while, starting with earlier projects like Polkadot. Polkadot is this concept that the parachain or the relay chain secures the parachain. The Cosmos Hub, interchain security, mesh security that Sunny will talk about. If Sunny is here, hopefully he'll come give a talk. And more recently, EigenLayer idea of using ETH to secure AVS. All these are instances of this notion of remote staking. And so if we take this concept and think about it really broadly, not specific to a single ecosystem like Polkadot or Atom or Cosmos or Ethereum, but think about it broadly, then you can ask the question, okay, so what asset, what crypto asset, okay, is a good crypto asset to be able to provide the security, since now we free ourselves to go beyond the native asset to any asset? Okay, well, since our goal is to minimize cost, then we should think about an asset which is large. The larger the supply of a commodity, the cheaper the cost, okay? We should also think about decentralization. We don't want this single person controlling this asset. We should also think about opportunity cost. Does this asset already have a lot of ways to earn yield? If it doesn't, then it potentially could also lower the cost. So if you think about all these factors, then I would argue that actually there is one asset that would answer affirmatively to all these three questions. And that's Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the largest asset by far, 3 or 4 times the size of the second asset. Okay? It is quite decentralized. You would argue no single person definitely controls Bitcoin. It's the oldest crypto asset. And it earns turbo yield. Turbo yield, okay? Most Bitcoin is actually idle. They're just sitting on the ledger or some custodial earning 0 yield. The little fraction of Bitcoin that earns yield is actually called wrapped Bitcoin. And this wrapped Bitcoin is earning turbo yield as well. So basically, if you hold Bitcoin, basically the only reason you're holding Bitcoin is to hope that it grows in value, and that's it. You're not using it as a yield-generating asset. And so we observe our project, Babylon, observe this opportunity that is, hey, we have this need of reducing security costs for people to launch proof-of-stake networks. We have this huge asset on the one side, sitting here idle, nowhere to use. Why don't we put the two together? And that's our project, okay? So our vision launched about a year and a half ago actually, is the idea of Bitcoin staking, okay? Now, when I first explained this word Bitcoin staking to people, people would think, oh, this is weird because Bitcoin is proof of work network. So how can it be staking? There's no staking. However, the key point of this concept is that Bitcoin, whether it's proof of work, proof of whatever, it is a crypto asset. And any asset can be used for staking, provided that it can be a collateral. The slashability is the key concept. And that's what we built, the protocol that enables Bitcoin to be used to secure any proof of stake networks and provide the slashability guarantee. So this is a crypto economic workshop. So this is a two-sided marketplace. Any economic system must have a marketplace. This is a two-sided marketplace. On the one side, we have the idle Bitcoiners, nothing to do with the Bitcoin, and staking allows them to continue holding the Bitcoin. You don't have to sell the Bitcoin, but at the same time earn yield in a trustless fashion, whereas the proof of stake networks will be able to obtain security at the lowest cost. Okay? And so both sides, we believe, have a need to join this marketplace, and therefore a good equilibrium can be achieved. All right. So right now we are basically building integration stacks with multiple ecosystems. The first ecosystem we worked on is with the Cosmos SDK stack. And we have a collaboration with Atom to integrate Bitcoin security with their network. We are also integrating with OP-Stack, as well as Arbitrum, to integrate Bitcoin staking with the Rollup stack to provide fast finality. And so we're busily working with multiple stacks. Now, okay, so the important thing about this protocol is that we effectively are able to achieve all the security guarantees that the best in class proof of stake protocols can achieve, both from the chain side and the staker side. From the staker side, we achieve the same level of trustlessness. No third party, no Vitalik, okay? The stake is staked on the Bitcoin chain. The only thing you need to trust is the Bitcoin chain. On the other hand, the proof of stake networks that gets the security achieves the so-called strongest slashable guarantee, which is whenever there is a so-called safety violation, or more colloquially, double spend, then 1/3 of the Bitcoin stake will be slashed. Under 2/3 honest majority, you have liveness, and you get a bonus guarantee, which is, unlike most proof of stake networks, we don't need social consensus to do fast unbonding because Bitcoin itself provides the consensus, okay? And so that is the security guarantee we achieved. I'll point you to the paper in which we describe these analysis at the end of the talk. Okay, good. All right. So, okay, so we launched our network. So just a little bit update on where we are in the project. We launched the network back in August, okay, and we opened 2 caps for a total of 16 Bitcoin blocks. So 16 Bitcoin block is how many minutes, guys? I know this is a Ethereum crowd, but you know, Ethereum came from Bitcoin. Sorry? 160 minutes. So yes, it was about 160 minutes, a little bit more than 2 hours, 2 caps, one in August, one in October, total of 160 minutes. We raised, no, sorry, we did not raise. We staked, so whoa, that's a miss. Hey guys, can you cut that off from the recording, guys? We did not raise. Okay, this is a non-custodial protocol, okay? Completely non-custodial protocol. The Bitcoin is only locked onto the Bitcoin chain, 24,000 of them. Hey, one thing good about working on Bitcoin staking is that you don't have to work very hard to raise the TVL. Because since we have these 24,000 Bitcoin staked, the TVL keeps on going up without doing anything because we closed the cap already. Just keep on going up. Thanks a lot, Trump. All right. So there you go. All right. So this is about 2.3 billion today. Now, this is an interesting plot. Okay, so what is this plot? This plot, I'm plotting the top 25 proof of stake networks, top 25 proof-of-stake network in terms of the staking market cap. That is how much stake is on each of these networks. Rank from the top, of course, guys, Ethereum. Ethereum is here. Pay attention, all right? Just to make the Ethereum crowd happy here. Top, and then down to some other blockchains like Mantra and Cosmos, etc. And these are the top 25. Now, what we're plotting here is to say, okay, we have the current TVL, which is 24,000 Bitcoin, locked in our Babylon staking contracts on the Bitcoin chain. Okay, at this TVL, how many of these networks, or which of these networks, can you secure with the same staking market cap? Okay, and we find that we could, using this current TVL, this number, we could secure 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about the top, up to about 18 or 19th. Okay, 18 or 19th. Just with these two caps. Now, if we could increase the TVL to 1% of Bitcoin, 1% of Bitcoin, then we could secure all except the top 4 chains. All but the top 4 chains. So I think this is an interesting number because this really gives a very concrete understanding of the scale of the Bitcoin asset. Okay? The Bitcoin asset is so big that only if we can stake only 1% of it, we could essentially secure almost all proof-of-stake networks, except the top 3 or 4. Okay? So I think that is, speaks to the scale of the asset. All right. Okay. All right. So I think it's interesting from the point of view of the Bitcoin use, because if you look at Bitcoin use cases, it started as a payment system, and it becomes a HODL system. And both of these use cases are interesting because it's native. You don't need to trust anybody else other than the Bitcoin chain for these two use cases. Any other use case of Bitcoin so far, like lending it or bridging it, requires trust or a third party. And what's interesting about a protocol, I believe, is that it creates the third native use case of Bitcoin. Third native use case of Bitcoin. Because it's also trustless. It's only trust. When we say trustless, we mean it only trusts Bitcoin. Everything has to trust Bitcoin, but nothing more than that. Okay, all right. Okay, so now that brings me to the last topic, which is, okay, so these are the technologies that we built. We need to build a lot of technology to get this thing to work. And the reason is because Bitcoin doesn't have a smart contract, and we want to do things trustlessly. So we need to use quite a bit of cryptography and consensus technology to make these work. And today we're not going to talk about them. You can look at our papers. However, and by the way, the organizer, CIMAC, told me do not talk about cryptography stuff. So there you go, one slide, okay? One slide. All right, but today I want to talk about, if I have 5 more minutes, I want to talk about one problem here. All right, which is the architecture of our system, okay? In the architecture of a system, it is modular, okay? So how it works is that you take an existing blockchain, and you add a layer, another committee, what we call Fnatic provider, running what we call Bitcoin staking Fnatic gadget on top of, for Ethereum people, Fnatic gadget is a very common concept, and this is in some sense a borrowing of that philosophy of a Fnatic gadget. But now for this Fnatic gadget, they're getting Bitcoin security. So they're signing special signatures to give you Bitcoin security. And a very interesting problem arises is that if you have this architecture, then it gives an opportunity not only to do a pure Bitcoin staking system, which was what we discussed earlier, but to do a dual quorum system where you have a native staker staking the validators in the existing consensus chain, plus the Fnatic provider Bitcoin staking. So it's a dual quorum because essentially both committees need to vote to get the security. And you can achieve the economic security is 1/3 of the native plus Bitcoin stake. Okay? Now, in such a system, typically, the reward comes from the inflation of the native token. Okay? So inflation of the native token. So typically in proof of stake chains, at least in the first few years, typically most of the reward comes from inflation and not from transaction fees. Hopefully later on it will be transaction fees, but at least in the early years, it will be inflation. So a very interesting problem here arises, which is, okay, so how do I split the inflation between the Bitcoin stakers and the native stakers? Because now there are two types of stakers. Both need reward. How do I split between them? Okay, so an interesting problem that we're trying to understand is optimizing the inflation split. Okay, what does that mean? All right, inflation split means I have a total inflation of my native token. Okay, let's say Atom, the native token. And now I want to say, okay, should I give 2% or half of that to Bitcoin staker, the other half to native staker, or 1/3, 2/3, or what? Okay? All right, so I'm splitting between the Bitcoin staking rewards and the native staker reward. Remember, all the rewards are from the native asset, but the recipients of these are two types of stakers, just to clarify. All right, now if I have the native staking reward, it will influence the native staker APY, and that will affect the amount of native stake on this chain. On the other hand, when the Bitcoin staker reward, it will also affect the Bitcoin staker APY. APY means annual whatever. I'm an engineer, okay? This is the most economic I can get, okay? All right. It will affect Bitcoin stake, right? Okay, so how do I split? Now, remember I said earlier that Bitcoin stake, the advantage of Bitcoin stake, is that it's cheap. It's abundant supply and low opportunity cost. So therefore, if you want to achieve a certain level of crypto economic security, a natural way is to give more split to the Bitcoin stakers because you get more bang for the buck. They're just cheaper, okay? So if you follow that logic, it seems that I should put all the inflation split entirely to the Bitcoin stakers. Okay, problem solved. Okay, that's not very good. What about my native stake? Now, however, the yield is coming from the native staker, okay? So there's another part of this influence diagram, which is that the native staker, APY, actually also affects the native token liquidity. The higher the APY, the more attraction there is to buy this token. So it increases the buy pressure. And this, in turn, would affect the native to BTC price ratio. And this will affect the Bitcoin staker APY. Because the APY depends not only on the reward percentage, but also on how much the native token is with respect to the Bitcoin token. So there's a loop here. And this loop suggests that the split should not be all the way to Bitcoin staker, but there is an attraction force of providing some split to the native token. And so it's a very interesting problem on figuring out some methodology here to optimize the split. Now, not only that, but actually this problem is not a static problem. It's actually a dynamic problem because if you look at here, this arrow and this arrow, you will see that the amount of stake also affects the APY. So in fact, there's a feedback loop. So this split should actually be dynamically adjusted. And all this is open problem, okay? So we just sort of stumble on this problem. We try to give some solution, do some simulations. And the simulation is actually done in collaboration with Gauntlet folks. But I think there's a lot of interesting problems here. And I think this problem is not specific to Bitcoin staking, but is actually quite generic for many restaking platforms. So I'm hoping that more people work on this problem. And so that's it. And so if you want to look at more details about a protocol, you can take a look at this paper. Remote staking, this concept of remote staking, more general concept in Bitcoin staking. And the idea is to achieve optimal economic safety. This paper is not about the most recent problem I was talking about. It's about this whole protocol. The most recent problem I'm talking about is just in progress. Thank you. Yes, yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about the pros and cons of your approach versus SBTC?
What's SBTC? Oh, that's
From Stacks.
Stacks. So our protocol, okay, our protocol is the goal is to secure all chains in general, okay, to provide proof of stake security. Stacks BTC, I think, is to secure its own layer 2. Okay, that's number one. Number two is that the security guarantee we provide is modeled after proof of stake security. I do not think SBTC stacks provide that level of security. Yeah. Yes?
What's happening actually on the Bitcoin blockchain? Like, how do you have this smart contract-like functionality?
Okay, so what's happening on the Bitcoin blockchain? So right now, this 24,000 Bitcoin that is staked on the Bitcoin blockchain is in terms of around 20,000 staking transactions, okay? So you go on the Bitcoin blockchain, you will see around 20,000 staking transaction, which locks those Bitcoin using so-called time lock. Bitcoin has an opcode called time lock, okay? So that's what's happening there. Now, there is a slashing path associated with the control script for these Bitcoin. At this moment, not activated yet because we haven't launched the chains yet. But when we launch the chain, the slashing path will be possible whenever there's a bad behavior on the proof of stake networks. So we figure out a solution which is a little bit like witness encryption in a very special case, which is when bad behaviors happen on the proof of stake chain, in particular when there's a double spend, then the private key of the validator will be leaked to any watchtower, and the watchtower can use that private key to activate the spending path of the locked Bitcoin. So it's a little bit like a witness encryption type construction, but for this very special sort of double spend events. Yes.
Then if one chain has something wrong and the Bitcoin gets slashed, will that weaken the security of other chains?
Yeah, so this is not a phenomenon specific. So sorry, okay. So the question is, can the same Bitcoin be staked to secure multiple proof of stake chains? And the question is, if that's the case, will it increase the risk, the slashing risk on that Bitcoin? And the answer is yes. But however, I should say that this notion of restaking or multi-staking on multiple chains is not very specific to Bitcoin staking. For example, EigenLayer restaking has this concept already. And so this is not different than that. That is, when you use the same asset to secure multiple chains, you're increasing the slashing risk. And then you have a certain budget for the slashing risk, and given that budget, you should not secure more than that. So that's the rough concept. Yeah.
I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this principal agent problem between the folks that are providing the Bitcoin to be staked versus the folks that will actually provide the activities that can be slashed. Have you thought about incentive alignment on that front?
Yeah, so that question is no different from the principal agent problem associated with any delegated proof of stake system. So I would like to emphasize that Bitcoin staking can be used in multiple fashions. For example, you could run the Fnatic provider, or that we call Fnatic provider, yourself. So you don't have to do delegation. You can do self-delegation. So delegation is an option that you can do. And the principal agent problem, I do not think is that different from any delegated proof of stake system. Thank you.
You mic that? Or? Okay. Well, this is a mic. Or this is a lavalier somewhere. Okay. And there's a handheld. Either, actually, here, this is probably the right handheld. Check if it's on. Yep. Okay, cool. And then that's slide forward and slide back.
Okay, cool.
All right, so next up, we've got Naveen Devasula. He'll be speaking about robust restaking networks.
Thanks, Tim. So yeah, again, my name is Naveen, and today I'm going to be talking about restaking risks, very similar to the style of question that was actually just asked. And this is joint work with Tim at Columbia. Cool. So before I talk about restaking, I think it'd be good to first go over staking. When people normally talk about the crypto-economic security of a proof-of-stake protocol, they're normally referring to a cost-benefit analysis that's being done from the perspective of an attacker. So the starting point here is take your favorite proof-of-stake protocol, let's say Ethereum, and that protocol is run by some validators. Each of those validators have some stake, which we'll call sigma v, and the way to interpret that stake is that that is what will be taken from a validator in the case that they launch an attack. Now, if enough validators do come together, let's say 33% or 50% of the supporting stake, then they can launch an attack. And in that case, in our model, the attack succeeds and their stake will be taken. They'll lose their stake. So again, in the cost-benefit analysis, the costs are given by the stake. What's the benefit? Well, we summarize that by this number pi, which denotes the rewards earned for a successful attack. And ideally, the total costs of launching an attack should be much, much greater than a reward. That is to say, the sum of the sigmas should be much bigger than pi. We call the protocol secure if it's the case that the sum of the sigmas is at least pi. But the bigger this buffer is, the bigger the gap is between the sum of the sigmas and the pi, perhaps the more crypto-economically secure it is in some sense. Now, running an analysis of this sort is not really a very controversial thing to do. Seems like a pretty straightforward thing to want to do. What is perhaps a lot more controversial is actually what these numbers should be, right? Maybe the sigmas are easier to come by. They can relate to on-chain stake. However, you might want to also incorporate other things. For example, if a validator launches an attack, maybe they lose some reputation, so that could also theoretically be factored in. And the pies themselves are also tricky to get. They could depend not only on the market cap of the protocol, but also perhaps on other apps or ecosystems that are running on it, or what volume is running on it at a given point in time. So this is all quite complicated, and none of this is the focus of this talk. This talk assumes that those numbers are given. So where does restaking come in? The main idea behind restaking is suppose you have some validators that are operating some proof-of-stake protocol, and they're a bit bored. They got some idle cycles. They got some spare cycles. So what should they actually do with those cycles? An idea that's gained traction by a couple projects is essentially to create a matching market between those spare validator cycles and services that are willing to pay for those cycles. So anytime you got a matching market, you can talk about what the gains from trade are. From the perspective of a validator, they get to take their stake and earn additional yield on that stake. And from the perspective of a service, they get to inherit a mature and more decentralized set of validators without being necessarily shackled to the underlying protocol's consensus and execution layer. But a core consequence of this is that now you have a single validator stake that's being potentially reused to secure multiple services in addition to the original one. And so the question now is that safe? Does that introduce some additional risk, right? Great. So formally, the way that we think about a restaking network is as a bipartite graph. So this picture here, it's actually very similar to the picture you saw on the very first slide. On the right-hand side, you have these validators, and they each have some stake, just as we did before. But now instead of there just being one service, there are multiple services. And you can maybe think about the second service as being like the original proof of stake protocol because it's connected to all the validators. And now each individual service has its own pi, which denotes the reward for corrupting it. And before, security was kind of this binary notion. Either the sum of the sigmas was bigger or less than the pi, right? Now it's kind of this combinatorial notion. We want it to be the case, for things to be secure, we want it to be the case that no subset of validators can attack or wants to attack any subset of services. So let's zoom into that. Ideally, again, we want no subset of validators to want to attack any subset of services. And let's take an example here. Again, this is the exact same graph you just saw on the previous slide, but now I've replaced every pi with a 1 and every sigma with a 1. And now suppose that the attack threshold for each service is 50% of its supporting stake. So we can ask the question, is this graph right here secure, right? And at face value, okay, well the sum of the pi's is 4 and the sum of the sigmas is 5. So in terms of the total profit you gain in the total cost, it seems like the total profit is less than the total cost. Yes. However, again, we want no subset of validators to want to attack any subset of services. And so actually, if we look closely, there indeed is a valid attack. So these middle 3 validators actually can want to launch an attack on these 4 services. Why is this the case? Well, first, they have the power to attack those services because these middle 3 validators constitute 2/3 of the stake of the top and bottom services, 3/5 of the stake of the second service, and 100% of the stake of the third service. So they all clear the 50% threshold. And furthermore, the profit they would gain from attacking is 4, but the stake they lose is only 3. So it's profitable for them to actually launch this attack. Now, if I were to actually double all the stakes, make them all go from 1 to 2, you could actually see that this indeed is a secure network. So there actually isn't a way for you to find a subset of validators that both can attack some subset of services, and it's also profitable for them to do so. And actually, this number 2 was a bit overkill. I could have actually made this 4/3, and this would have still worked. So actually, in a sense, this network is 50% over-collateralized. And as we'll see later, this 50% number, this over-collateralization factor, is going to be important. So security is great. However, we might not be quite satisfied there. We might want this buffer to be there. So just like I talked about in the first slide, we might want the sum of the sigmas to be bigger than the pi by some buffer, right? Why might that be the case? Well, first we might have gotten the pi's wrong, right? The pi's were kind of hard to estimate. Maybe I got that wrong. But even in a broader sense, if you're in this regime where there's many services, many validators, you could just imagine there's just a lot of chaos that's going on, right? Like some service could be either buggy or malicious and unintendedly slash some validators, point being that you can't stop small shocks from existing in the world, right? And what we might want to have hold true is that even if we were to poke this restaking network, apply some sort of small shock, the repercussions shouldn't be catastrophic. So to make this a little more concrete, the concern was that we had a graph that was secure by our original definition, but once we applied some sort of small shock, it resulted in some greater catastrophe, right? Either it results in some additional validators launching an attack, or worse still, it could maybe even trigger a cascade where those validators launch an attack on some services, they get slashed, some other services are then weakened, and then subsequent validators launch an attack. So in this example, taking the exact same graph you saw on the previous slide, but replaced all these 2's with 2 minus epsilons. So instead of thinking about this as being like 50% over-collateralized, maybe think about it instead as like 49% over-collateralized, right? So still a very secure network. But now let's say there's a shock. And this is not quite a small shock, it's actually a fairly large one. We've gotten rid of 20% of the overall stake by removing this middle validator. And now we can ask the question, is this graph still secure? That is to say, there's no subset of validators that wants to attack any subset of services. But now with the caveat that, again, this attack threshold is 50%, and this stake that's now left the system can affect whether or not the security condition is being met. So it turns out there actually is a valid attack, right? These middle 2 validators do want to attack all 4 services. First of all, it's profitable for them to do so because the total profit they make is 4. The total cost in stake that they lose is 4 minus 2 epsilon. And they also have the power to attack because they make up 50% of the first first, second, and last services, and 100% of the third service. So it's both profitable for them to do so, and they can do it. And you can imagine in a bigger network that maybe this triggers even a further cascade. So the upshot is that we started with this shock that was only 20% of the overall stake. But ultimately, after subsequent attacks, we ended up losing 60% of the stake loss, right? So this is kind of this blow up that happened. And this is essentially the main purpose of this paper, is to understand that blow up factor. In what case can you say that it's not a big deal that a small shock took place? That you can start with some graph, a small shock can take place, and you're not worried that this results in a catastrophic consequence. So our first result's actually quite clean. It turns out that this blow-up factors, that 20% going to 60%, is actually entirely governed by the over-collateralization. That was this 50% or 49% that I was talking about in the previous slide. So how do you actually compute that over-collateralization? Well, we begin basically by looking at the regular security conditions. So again, for any subset of values B that can attack some services A, their total sigmas should be at least the pi. And now we insist that it actually holds with some buffer, right? So not only are you bigger, you're big by some buffer. And this over-collateralization factor is actually the largest number gamma such that this condition holds with the buffer. So you're not just over-collateralized, you're actually over-collateralized again in this kind of overkill way. Even if the profits from corruption were inflated by this factor of 1 plus gamma, you're actually still secure. And the upshot is, suppose this holds, we can actually show that in any restaking network, and suppose you start with any original fraction of stake lost in a shock, let's call it psi, then you're going to lose not only psi, but also additional stake from additional subsequent attacks. And you can show that those additional subsequent attacks, the stake you lose is at most psi over gamma. So the total stake you're going to lose is the original psi, and then up to at most psi over gamma for a total stake loss of psi times 1 plus 1 over gamma. So the idea here is that like the bigger this buffer is, the bigger the over-collateralization, the bigger that number gamma is, the less your subsequent stake loss is going to be, and the more kind of robustly secure you can maybe say your restaking network is. And this result is actually, in fact, tight in the following sense. If you give me any psi and gamma, I can come back and give you a restaking network in addition to a shock that is of size psi, such that you actually do lose this amount of stake. So you've actually already seen that this is tight for the case of psi equals 0.2 and gamma being arbitrarily close to 0.5. So if there's essentially one slide that I want you to remember from this talk, it's probably this one. Over-collateralization is both necessary and sufficient to prevent a small shock from resulting in catastrophic losses. So I am going to, because I want to make sure this is clear, I'm going to pause very briefly just in case there's any clarifying questions on this. All right, if there aren't any, then I'll continue on. Okay, so that result's great, but we're also happy about the fact that we can actually generalize it to a setting that's maybe a little bit more practically relevant. And the idea here is that, like, say that now restaking's taken off. There's many services, many validators, right? And now let's say that you are a service and you maybe belong to some coalition C of services, right? So this maybe represents one particular ecosystem, and everyone in this coalition, they have some understanding of maybe the profits from corruption or details around those services, but they don't really know anything about the outside, right? Things can be very chaotic outside of your coalition, but you do know maybe what's going on inside your coalition. And you want to know if maybe there's some way of still getting some guarantee around worst case stake loss, but something that's maybe localized to your coalition. And you might have some qualms with trying to interpret the previous result within this context. The first is that I'm this coalition. I might know the profits from corruption of my own people within the coalition, but I don't know anything about what's going on outside. In fact, I don't even know if things outside are abiding by some over-collateralization factor, right? So I might not know if this condition's actually being held. Second of all, let's say it actually was held, and you might even be able to make some nice statement that says that, like, say 0.1% of the stake is lost in some, overall stake is lost in some shock, the overall repercussions are maybe 1.1% of the overall stake. That's nice from a global perspective, but what if all of C's security falls within that 1%, right? They might want some guarantees around their own particular stake, within their own neighborhood. And then finally, I might have some understanding of like the magnitude of shocks that might arise within my own neighborhood, but I might not really understand what's going on outside my neighborhood in terms of what types of shocks I should see and how big they are. In fact, I might even want to be insulated where I get some guarantee that no matter what shocks happen outside of my neighborhood, I'm actually still fine, right? So is it actually possible to make such a guarantee where essentially we want some condition that says if C is locally over-collateralized for some appropriate notion of that term, where whatever local over-collateralization condition we describe, it's actually verifiable just by the people in C without knowing stuff about the outside world. Is it possible to construct such a condition where if they're locally over-collateralized, then every locally small shock, so shock within my neighborhood, results in a small loss of stake, again, to my neighborhood, local to C. So I got to define those things. What does that mean? What type of local over-collateralization could work? What does locally small mean? What does local to C mean? And two of these three things are going to be a little easier to define first. I'm going to start with locally small and local to C. And the idea here is that we're going to restrict our attention to looking at validators that are exclusively restaking for for the services in C. So services in C could have validators that are restaking only just to things in C, as well as validators that are restaking also to services outside of C. And we're going to call the ones that are exclusively securing for C, we're going to call it gamma C. And the idea behind these validators is that that's essentially what C is counting on, right? We know that these validators in gamma C essentially can't be slashed because they're trying to attack other services, because they're not restaked for any other services. So that's what local to C is. A locally small shock now is going to be a shock that applies only to their local security gamma C. So I still owe you a definition now of what locally over-collateralized is, but before that, turns out there's a couple of technical complications of trying to extend the global result to the local case. And the first one is that in the global result applied to arbitrary cascades of what we were calling valid attacks. But it turns out that you actually have to restrict your attention from those to a subclass of attacks that we call stable attacks in order to prevent these degenerate cases of validators free riding on other validators. The second condition is that you actually, and this is what locally over-collateralized means, is that instead of just over-collateralizing these pairs A and B where the validators can attack some services, you actually need to over-collateralize these attack headers, which is essentially a broader class of things. And so, yeah, I promise neither of these compromises are actually that complicated. They're pretty straightforward, but in the interest of time, can't actually go into them in depth. The main idea behind this local over-collateralization is that you don't need to, you need to over-collateralize more than just pairs A and B where B can attack A. You also need to make sure that you're still over-collateralized even if some validators outside of gamma C can join your attack for free. And so the good news here is that those two technical compromises are not just necessary, they're actually sufficient as well. If they both hold, then a clean generalization of the global result actually does hold. So again, if an initial shock of a psi fraction of your local security gamma C leaves the system, then after any arbitrary cascade of stable attacks, you'll end up with an ultimate loss of at most psi times 1 plus 1 over gamma of, again, your local security, so long as you over-collateralize all your attack headers. And now, a small aside, separate from the local and global security results, all of those results applied to essentially arbitrary length cascades, but cascades themselves can actually be interesting to look at in their own right. One thing we also did find is that this over-collateralization factor gamma, not only does it mitigate what the total worst case stake loss is, it actually also results in a bound on the maximum length a cascade can have. So roughly speaking, it drops it from linear to logarithmic. This is the final slide. Mostly just restating all the results we talked about previously. Maybe one thing I want to highlight is that what we tried to do in this model is essentially keep it as minimal as possible. to still be able to study some facet of restaking risk without being, while still being agnostic, essentially, to the implementation details of how the restaking protocol is being done. And the goal here is to essentially enable other researchers to build on the work and create a foundation for understanding restaking risks. So there's already been some good follow-up work by Tarun Chitra and Malesh Pai that I recommend you check out. And of course, happy to chat further about any future directions. That's it. Thank you.
Hey. So yeah, just kind of looking at this functional form and trying to interpret the limit behavior. Is it, if gamma is 1, just to make sure I understand that correctly, that means you have kind of no buffer, right?
If gamma is 1, sorry, what did you say?
That means you have no buffer.
That means you actually have, so if gamma is 0, you have no buffer.
I see.
Gamma is 1, you actually are 100% over collateralized.
Okay. So at that point, then a shock of like, what's that Greek letter there?
Psi.
Psi,
So,
yeah, a shock of psi results in a loss of 2 psi.
2 psi, that's right.
Cool.
That's right, yeah.
So then at 0, if you're 0% over collateralized, this is undefined.
Yeah, so if you're 0% over collateralized, you can actually show that an arbitrarily small shock can result in the entire thing disappearing.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Thanks. So just to clarify on the main result and the cascading result, so does the loss of psi times 1 over 1 minus gamma then can be interpreted as another shock that then causes a loss of 1 plus 1 over gamma to the n?
No, so actually this is what happens after the full cascade takes place. So you start with a shock of psi, then you let an arbitrary, whatever worst case cascade take place after that loss of psi. The total worst case loss after all of that is at most this 1 plus 1 over gamma times psi. Yeah.
Thanks.
Colleagues from sort of more traditional finance backgrounds about restaking, the over-collateralized rehypothecation like blockage, it almost prevents meaningful conversation. And when I've tried, again, at a very high associational level, switching gears to think about like fractional reserve banking, all of a sudden the dialogue becomes more robust. And it was to see this, sort of getting more nailed to the ground. I was wondering if that literature has been useful or like might be useful to a kind of extension of this.
Great question. Yeah, we did take a look at a lot of the traditional finance literature and how they look at systemic risk. There is kind of a key difference where the process you're describing, like this is kind of this leveraging thing, right? We actually, like leveraging doesn't really appear here. So like there is a reuse of stake, right, in this thing, but it's not about borrowing against your stake and leveraging. It's more just about, do you end up in a situation where the total profits from corruption end up exceeding the cost of corruption, right? So there isn't this type of leveraging behavior, which is different. At the same time, if you do look at that literature, they are concerned about essentially the same types of things of, does a small shock cause catastrophe? So that's very much inspired by the same type of thing that we're looking at here, but the mechanics are a little different, yeah. Yeah, so that's a totally different facet of risk. What we're looking at here is not that, that's a separate analysis, yeah.
So you might have said it, and in which case I apologize, but I didn't understand what's the role of the network structure in your results. So if you can clarify the assumption, and also can the network structure itself be in a design parameter together with gamma, for example?
Great question. Yeah. So the network structure appears essentially in the condition for security. So again, the condition for security is that no subset of validators wants to attack any subset of services, right? So the conditions for so there's two things that must be true for a valid attack to exist. The first thing is that it must be profitable for those validators to attack those services. That doesn't really depend on the structure, right? That's just adding up the sigmas and adding up the pi's. What does depend on the structure is, can they attack? So again, there's this attack threshold of 50% in that example, right? And what that means is that it must be the case that for those validators, they must constitute 50% of the neighborhoods 50% of the neighborhoods of all this, of the stake for each of those services. So that does depend on the graph structure. And one way of thinking about this over-collateralization condition is it actually it's a constraint not only on the pies and sigmas, but also on that structure, right? So like, there's many ways I could make things over-collateralized. You could do this either by, a combination of changing the numbers as well as changing the structure. So we're looking at the whole thing at once, but concretely where the structure arises is in talking about can a given group of validators attack a given group of services.
Yeah, thank you. On a practical level, how should the network designer should make use of this theoretical bound? They should be thinking about Slack or the local security or worst case. So could you?
Yeah, that's something Tim and I have been thinking a lot about. I think, so maybe at a first glance, this general idea of over-collateralization being helpful, while that doesn't, this result is nice in that it gives you a concrete thing of just like how things would blow up. At the current moment, because of the fact that these pies are, not known, this is mostly theoretical, that doesn't directly help. What we do think will be a lot more helpful is this local condition. So the local condition, we do think that it is potentially practical for a service or a group of services to have an understanding, a general understanding of like what is at least their profit from corruption, as well as the profit from corruption of maybe a couple people in some coalition, at least having an estimate of that. And given those estimates, it is actually possible, again, to get this type of local security. So how exactly that would be implemented, I think that's, the practitioners are going to have to think about how that could work. But at the very least, feels like the numbers are at least maybe noble. And so there you could perhaps get some system between a coalition of services that allows them to get some sort of concrete guarantee of if a shock happens in my neighborhood, here's the worst case local blow up. Also true, yeah. Right, all right. Thank you.
So for the final talk of the day, happy to introduce Sunny Agarwal, who will be speaking about mesh security. So.
Thank you. Hey everyone, thank you for staying until the end of the day to listen to me speak. So a little bit about myself. My name is Sunny Agarwal. I work on a project called Osmosis. It's built on the Cosmos ecosystem. It's primary DEX. But today I'll be talking about something called mesh security, not really directly related to my core work at Osmosis, but just more something that, a system that model that I've come to based off my just thinking about Cosmos and blockchain philosophy and staking systems. I've been working on proof of stake for 7-8 years now, and so this is kind of where I see the end state of all of this restaking stuff going. So I'll start off with, many people have probably seen this political compass system before. You have this like classical axis of like libertarian, authoritarian, and then left and right. And I saw this like meme like probably like 4 or 5 years ago that I could never get out of my head, where it like just put like network topologies on this like political compass axis, where you have like, authoritarian left system. No, left kind of implies this idea of like there's very little, not a lot of, what do you call it? A lot of equality between the members, right? There's not this like very rigid hierarchical system. But on the right means, there's more like power laws. Some things are more connected than others. Meanwhile, you have like authoritarian versus libertarian, where authoritarian means there's like, okay, there is this like strict hierarchy, while on the libertarian, there's like less hierarchical. There's multiple pathways between systems. So, when I think about when we're designing systems, I like this quote from David Clark, one of early internet pioneer of, "We reject kings, presidents, and voting. We believe in rough consensus and running code," right? So, what we're trying to build here in if you're building truly decentralized systems, whether it's the internet or blockchains or whatever, right? We're trying to build towards libertarian-esque systems, more, avoiding these hierarchical central points of failure. So that leaves us to okay, we want to architect either for green systems or yellow systems. And green systems do work quite well. We've spent a lot of time building these kinds of systems. I would consider BFT and democracy as examples of green systems, right? And when I say democracy here, I mean literal open air democracy. It requires this many-to-many, all-to-all voting system. When this is open air democracy in Appenzollern, it's a canton in Switzerland, but you can literally see everyone vote. Same thing with BFT systems, right? Classical BFT systems. You require all-to-all communication, n-squared communication, which these systems are very good, get fast finality, but they don't scale to many participants. You can run classical BFT systems with thousands, maybe tens of thousands of nodes, but once you try to get to the point of millions of nodes, it just doesn't work. Same thing with democracy, right? It works because Appenzollern is a canton with a population of less than 100,000 people, right? But you try to scale this to 10 million people, it's just not going to work. But we have systems for that called federalism, where we built systems within systems. So that's kind of what we've ended up building in the blockchain world as well today, where we have each green system you can think of as a blockchain, but then we have many green systems all interconnected with each other in a very, many green systems coexisting. And now the question is, what is the network structure going to be between these many blockchains? And I think what we're seeing here is most blockchain architectures today are pushing for very hub and spoke style network topologies for this meta layer of blockchain communication. And I think that if we end up doing that, we kind of just have defeated the point of what we've been trying to do in blockchains, of building resilient, libertarian-esque structures, right? Where even though individual subcomponents might be these green decentralized blockchains, if your overall network topology is this very hierarchical system, we've still just built in central points of failure, central points of control. So, this is what we're trying to avoid building. So, one option is you might be able to build meta systems of green. We have people who have in our team that have worked on stuff can you run Tendermint consensus over IBC between blockchains, where each blockchain is a node? I think this is a interesting realm of research, and I think a few people have worked on this kind of stuff. But where I'm more interested in is looking at how do we build more towards these yellow systems, because these seem the most natural and infinitely scalable to me. Even if you try to build meta green systems, they'll come into scaling limitations at some point. And this is effectively what we've built in the Cosmos ecosystems thus far today, where you have this is a picture of the different bridging topology of the Cosmos ecosystem. And as you can see, there's different chains that have different levels of connectivity. Osmosis is there as one of the high connectivity things, as the primary DEX for the ecosystem. But as you can see, there's no hub and spoke system in the communication structure of the Cosmos network. And so but we have this system where today all of the Cosmos ecosystem all has sovereign security. All of these chains have different security levels, and now we're kind of moving to this world of, okay, how do we increase the security of all of these systems? And now we're entering this world of restaking. But what I want to argue is that a world of restaking, we should aim to maintain this yellow, non-hierarchical structure, right? It would ruin the point of what we've been building if we just have all security come from a single token. So let's talk through what the models of economic shared security are. This is a diagram that I'll use where, just as a key, where the hexagon represents a blockchain. The circle in the middle of that represents the validator set of that blockchain staked by its native token. And that line represents that validator set validates that blockchain. So typically, you look at this today, most blockchains, most proof-of-stake L1s, like Osmosis, like Axelar is another Cosmos chain that we use often for bridging. We all both have our own validator set that secures our own blockchain. So the Osmo token secures the Osmosis blockchain. The Axel token secures the Axelar blockchain. Beyond sovereign blockchains, now we're starting to see things like replicated security. This is something that the Cosmos Hub provides, where the entire validator set of one blockchain secures another blockchain. So in this example, the Atom token secures both the Cosmos Hub blockchain and the Neutron blockchain. And this system, they're kind of scaling this up, where the same validator set can secure more and more chains. But as you can imagine, this is not very scalable, right? You can't, the same validator set just securing many things is going to, this is effectively block size increases. So what we've started to do now is sharded replicated security, where you don't need the entire validator set of the Cosmos Hub. So the entire Atom staking set secures the Cosmos Hub, but a subset of that staking set can secure the Neutron chain. This becomes a lot more scalable, right? You have, different subsets of the larger Atom staking set can secure the Neutron chain or the Duality chain or the Noble chain. And, this model that we kind of pioneered in Cosmos has then now been replicated in Ethereum via products like EigenLayer, where you say, okay, yeah, hey, you have this entire ETH validator set, or staking set securing the Ethereum blockchain. And now you can have subsets of that staking set secure things like EigenDA or an Oracle chain or a sequencer chain. So, however, as David talked about a bit in his talk, most chains want to have their own native token that can be used for staking themselves, right? So really what's going to end up happening is this kind of thing called borrowed securities, where something like Osmosis, we have our own native token, Osmo, right? There's no reason for us to get all of our security from, borrowing it from ETH. So what we would do is we would use, you can have a single chain get its staking value from a combination of assets. So what will happen here is something like Osmosis has the Osmo token used to secure the Osmosis chain, but it can also borrow, let's say, BTC security from something like Bitcoin via Babylon to secure the Osmosis chain. And you can imagine that this can scale up, right? BTC can then be used to scale, all of these Cosmos sovereign L1s, like Osmosis has Osmo, Axelar has Axel, Stargaze has Stars, but they all borrow BTC security to augment their existing native security. However, great, okay, this works. But we're then still putting ourselves very dependent on a single system, right? It's still this very red system. And what we're trying to do is avoid building these empire models of blockchains where everyone has to be subservient to a single token, to a single system for their world, right? We're trying to build more towards how the real world works today, which is, things like NATO and stuff. So how does security work in the real world? We have systems like NATO, right? NATO is an alliance of many countries that all have a mutual defense pact, right? It is not, it's not an empire model, right? Yes, there is power laws in NATO, like the United States provides, a majority of security, or at least, very least, the plurality of security to NATO, right? But that's not what NATO is. NATO is a mutual defense pact where every country that's part of the alliance is securing each other. And I believe that that's the world is kind of held together by this mesh of security alliances. And so I believe that this is kind of the system that will start to adopt in blockchains as well. So you look at these, I chose Axelar and Osmosis as my main examples in both of these because these are two chains that have deep, deep economic interdependencies with each other. Actually, one of the reasons I brought up this one is that you'll see that actually almost every EU country, minus I think 2 or 3, is part of NATO, right? And the reason is economic interdependency naturally leads to security, is a natural security interdependency. And so 2 chains like Axelar and Osmosis, Osmosis makes up the majority of Axelar's TVL. We're their biggest customer as a bridging product. Meanwhile, a large portion of our assets and bridged assets on Osmosis, the assets that do volume on Osmosis, are made up of assets bridged by Axelar. It would suck for either of us if the other got attacked, right? And so it behooves both of us to actually build a system where both of our chains can actually be secured by the sum of our market caps. So imagine by doing this joint security alliance, the Osmosis chain is secured by both the sum of Osmo market cap and the Axel market cap. Meanwhile, Axelar is secured by both Axel market cap and the Osmo market cap. Obviously, it would be an opt-in system where the Osmo stakers that want to secure Axelar will, and the same way the other way around. But in the equilibrium will come to a point where the majority of stakers of one chain will probably be restaking the other as well. And then you can imagine as you have more and more chains that have this level of economic interdependency, more and more chains will join this sort of alliance system, like Akash Network, right? Osmosis is the primary DEX for the AKT chain, for Akash Network, right? So it helps them to secure the Osmosis chain as well. Meanwhile, AKT usually makes up 5% of our volumes on a daily basis. It helps us to make sure that the Akash Network chain is secure. So what will happen is you'll have this growing alliance of chains that have economic interdependencies with each other, but they're all going to be secured by a combination of their market caps. And then what you can do is, as needed, you'll bring in other sort of security systems like ETH and Bitcoin to augment that security. So how do you decide who to restake with, right? So this, once again, bringing it back to my history example, for the longest time, countries used to, primarily be secured by mercenaries, right? This is a picture of the Swiss mercenary army, Battle of Mount Garden, I think. So yeah, European countries used to basically, militaries used to be primarily mercenary built until, one country basically invented this, the French basically invented this idea of the citizen army, where they basically realized that, hey, the most loyal, the most hardworking army that you can have is citizens, because they are not motivated by money, they're motivated by true belief in the cause, right? And so you can imagine this is the equivalent of your native token holders, right? Your native token holders are usually some people who are bought into the vision of your product, right? They're not gonna collect the rewards from this thing and just dump them immediately, right? They're gonna compound them probably. They're going to, and oftentimes a lot of these token holders of projects, they're motivated by not just the economics of the product, but they feel part of that community. They're not going to attack the chain because it will ruin. They have social and political motivations for the success of this chain beyond just pure economic. Then, if you get overwhelmed with your citizen army, that's when you bring in allies, right? You work with your allies. So that's where you say, hey, Osmosis, we're going to bring, when you're in a military conflict, you depend on your citizens first. Then you say, hey, we need some help. We're going to bring in our allies, right? So that's why you say, hey, we're going to top up our security when needed with allied support. And then finally, your last resort, when you're really overwhelmed and you need just a tiny bit of top-up security, we still use mercenaries in today's world, but they're very much a last resort. So, you kind of have this hierarchy of who you want to use as restaked capital, right? You first will use, your native token, the most aligned. Then you'll start using your allies like Axelar, this is Levana, another Purpose product that we work very closely with, because, they're less likely to dump your token and they're more likely to build bilateral treaties, right? Axelar will, if we allow Axel to restake on Osmosis, Axelar will also allow Osmo to restake on Axelar. It's an alliance, and it's a mutually beneficial. And then finally, the base of the pyramid, when you need it at the end, it comes like mercenary capital like Bitcoin and ETH. Yeah, and so, why I say this is like, people think, oh, you can just give away all your like rewards, but it's like, no, these rewards are, on osmosis, majority of our APRs are coming from like real economic profit, and like you should be kind of greedy with it, right? You don't want to just give it away to other tokens unless there's a real reason to. And so one way I've how I think about it is, take some inspiration from the Thorchain incentive pendulum, where what you should do is you should look at like, hey, what is your security threshold you're targeting? What is the amount of assets available for, at risk, right? And for us, that is our bridged assets. As an app chain DEX, there's assets bridged to osmosis that are tradable. So what we should do is say, hey, this is the economic value of the bridged assets. Let's make sure our economic threshold, what do we want our economic threshold to say? Maybe we say, hey, our security threshold is we want to aim for 1.5x the economic value of the bridged assets. And then we look and say, hey, the amount of staked Osmo here is not enough. This is when you implement an incentive pendulum, where you start to shift economic rewards towards other tokens until you get the required amount of restake, right? So you say, hey, let's add in some allied restake. Okay, we're still not at our target. That's when you finally bring in like the mercenary restake. So you want to, optimize for as much native staked capital as possible until you hit your security thresholds. Another thing is what you should do is try to diversify your security. Don't let any one chain make up the majority of your economic security, right? Like, Osmosis, once upon a time, we were very economically intertwined with a chain called Terra, but obviously, most of you know the story of what happened there. But so one thing that's actually very interesting is we actually have a proto version of this mesh security model already running on Osmosis called superfluid staking, where what that means is we allow liquidity shares of assets, liquidity LP shares of assets on Osmosis to be used to secure the Osmosis chain. So, let's say we have Osmo Atom LP shares, or you have Osmo BTC LP shares. We also had Osmo Luna LP shares also being used to secure our chain. But what we did was we had security thresholds where we said, hey, no one LP share is allowed to make up more than 10% of the staking value on our chain. And then we have like hundreds of different LP shares able to do that. And that made it so even when the Luna token hyperinflated and the value of those LP shares went to zero, people could mint them infinitely, no one was able to overtake the chain because of the corruption of one asset. And this is kind of the whole point of this whole vision of security diversification, avoiding central points of failure. And so, what you could do is like, we say, hey, the amount of Atom can never be more than 10% of our security budget. So as more Atom comes in, it hits a cap. And so, more and more Atom comes in, it just decreases the amount of staking power each individual Atom receives. And so, there's all the, I'm happy to go later into like all the models we've come up with, like, oh, you should also, if only 5% of the Cosmos Hub, the Atom staking set is restaking on Osmosis, you lower the amount of economic stake they can have on Osmosis. But if you say, realize, hey, 70% of Atom validator set is restaking on Osmosis, you let their caps increase to like 10% or 20%. So there's all these like inputs that go into your security model here. So, once again, what we're trying to build here is how do we build a yellow system for security? We want to avoid central points of failure. This is what I've been working on in blockchains, in Cosmos for the last 8 years, trying to build these truly decentralized systems. And it would be a shame if we just let the security systems that we're using to secure these blockchains not follow the same principles that we set out for the rest of it. So, thank you. Happy to take any questions. I think everyone just wants to get home. Oh, got one.
Hi, Sunny. First, a compliment for the aesthetics of the presentation.
Thank you.
Then another thing I was struggling to wrap my head around while listening to this is the sort of interplay between the scalability of consensus protocols and these kind of things and mesh security. So for example, I think like Tendermint, the most validators, you have like 150 or something like that. There's some like upper limit on the number of nodes you can have. How does that relate to the sort of idea of mesh security?
I think, so how that relates is that I think these are kind of actually different points, right? I think the Tendermint was more about just the idea that like, hey, green systems don't scale, right? And democracy and classical BFT were examples of green systems. But I think that like, the reason why multiple blockchains exist, why app chains and exist in general, is because it's hard to come to consensus on a global system, right? That's kind of why why Ethereum itself, I think, has shifted away from like a single chain model towards this like more cosmosification of like many rollups, because at some point, like if everyone, they'll get to this point where there's lack of consensus on how to upgrade Ethereum. Different people want different protocol upgrades to happen, right? Like the Ethereum mainnet as a single chain is a green system in the sense of if you try to be a single system that's everything to everyone, you're not going to be able to iterate and scale, because coming to coordination and consensus amongst like so many different parties who want different things is not possible. So the way to scale that is to build everyone has their own little island of what they need, right? Like Uniswap is building Unichain, Osmosis has our own chain, everyone has their own chain doing what they need. And then, but now you've split up the security here. How can we use everyone's token to then like provide global security?
Right, so is a way of thinking about this that like you are changing the crypto economic argument, but still for most of these chains, you have a limited number of actors who are participating. And so if you just use like a sort of honesty assumption threshold, security is like pretty much the same as before.
I think that's a different point. I think that's true. But I mean, I think here, okay, maybe another way of saying this, okay, like maybe hot take, I think the roll-up, roadmap is actually going to like detract value from ETH over time. And ETH is like, I don't think the whole DA stuff actually gives value to ETH. I think most value for blockchains comes from like owning the execution layer because of MEV value and transaction fees and stuff like that. And so as more and more of the value goes to app chains, right? Like more trading volume goes to Unichain or to Hyperliquid or to Osmosis and to all these different places, the value of ETH is going to go down over time. And now how are we, we've kind of been operating on this model that, hey, all these chains are going to get security from ETH as a restaking, as a single token, right? But I just don't think that's going to, I don't think ETH is going to actually be valuable enough to secure the economic activity. Like if we believe that more and more of like the world economic activity is going to happen on blockchains, I don't think ETH's market cap is actually going to be sufficient to secure all of it. But a combination of many app chains like market caps, I think will be.
Cool, thank you. Happy to solicit spicy takes always.
Another way of thinking of this is like, think about an Oracle network. Would you rather have your Oracle network secured by only Link token or secured by Link token and Aave token and Maker token and SNX and whoever else is using that Oracle network, right? I think you just build more resiliency and more economic stake when the Oracle network is secured by the market caps of all of its users rather than a single provider token. Yeah. Mhm.
what I mean by that. You know, when I think about economic security, at least in the Bitcoin world, it's not just the value of the asset. There's a whole network of validated nodes,
Mhm.
miners, and when you use Bitcoin in the way that I think things like Babylon work, you're punishing people who put their assets up to stake for double signing. But that does not mean you're actually inheriting anything about the mining set or the validator set of the Bitcoin network. You're just, and probably the asset, Bitcoin, is not going to fall if someone does double sign on another network. So you're not actually inheriting what I think of as the security of Bitcoin. And so I want to understand what you mean by shared security.
Yeah, so Bitcoin is definitely like a weird one in this case, right? Because of two things. One, it's like, you're right, Bitcoin, the main chain itself is not secured by proof of stake. So it's like, you know, as well as the fact that Bitcoin script is very limited. Right now, Babylon only slashes for double signs, right? Maybe in the future, there's ways of adding additional slashing conditions. But the way we've actually implemented mesh security today is it's a contract. You know, you can imagine on something like on Ethereum or any of these Cosmos chains, like you can implement arbitrary slashing conditions. And one of the things we actually had to do was make sure you can prove slashes to that chain itself without trusting the original. You know, let's say Osmosis, you know, some eigenlayer validators or ETH is restaked to secure Osmosis, and Osmosis does some Oracle manipulate, like the validators do some Oracle manipulation, right? We want to be able to actually submit that Oracle manipulation as a proof to a smart contract on Ethereum. So any slashing condition that you can instantiate into a smart contract is a viable slashable thing, right? So yes, this purely has to do with the economic stake up at, you know, the economic value that's staked. It's not like, you know, if a validator on, you know, if the restaked validators, eigenlayer restaked validators to Osmosis do something malicious, yes, it's not gonna like destroy Ethereum, but it's gonna just slash the stake of those validators, and the goal is to get as much economic stake as possible. And then, yes, it has to do with what slashing conditions can you encode in a smart contract. And on a Turing complete system like Ethereum or CosmWasm, you can implement almost a lot of different slashing conditions, right? And, you know, especially if you add like, you know, some ZK proofs. There are obviously some slashing conditions that are not provable, like data availability stuff. But, and then, yeah, you know, the Bitcoin side of things, yeah, the problem is Bitcoin script is so limited in what you can prove on Bitcoin, which is why at the moment Babylon is somewhat limited in the types of slashing conditions it can support. But so if you ignore Babylon for a second here and just focus on systems that have Turing complete systems where you can write arbitrary slashing conditions, you can do a lot more than just double signs. Yeah.
I think there were two issues that were mentioned, right? One is slashing conditions, and two is borrowing the entire security of the chain. I think those are orthogonal issues, right? So I think none of the systems you're thinking about is borrowing the security of the entire chain.
Yeah, that's why I use this, like, you know, these sub-circles within the larger circle, right? The way I tried to draw this is, let me go back a little bit. It's like, yes, the entire validator set of Osmo is securing the, sorry, let me go back. Oh, God. Okay, so like the entire validator set, Osmo staking set, is securing the Osmosis chain, but a subset of that validator set is securing the Axelar chain, and that's an opt-in system, and it's up to the Axelar chain to provide incentives to Osmo stakers to want to restake to secure it. And yeah, so the difference here is like on Bitcoin, you're right. This is not a great picture because of the way that, like, you can imagine Bitcoin doesn't have that, or actually, it doesn't have that line, right? There's no line from there's no Bitcoin validator set that's securing, that in its entirety is securing the Bitcoin blockchain, but you can still have Bitcoin stakers secure other chains. The miners are securing Bitcoin, right? But these circles are about economic stakers, not miners. Yeah.
I would like to understand, just coming back to your idea of defensive alliance, right? In geopolitics, for example, you want to include strong members, you don't want to be brought to a war for the weakest member, right? So in your case, in the case of this alliance, what parameters do you look in to include a potential change into your alliance? What do you look at? Because you don't want to have another case of Inglaterra, right? Despite you have your risk management condition, 10% cap.
Yeah, so the question is, how do you choose who to do shared, like this, bilateral security treaties with? I think it comes down to, first question is, do you need to do bilateral security? Do you need more security at all? That's kind of what I was talking about with this, like, okay, have a security budget target, and like, if you're already at your target, you don't need to get in, you don't need $10 billion of economic security when there's only like $50 million of stake or like seizable assets on your chain. So step one, choose if you need more. Step two, if you do need more, try to figure out who has high levels of economic dependence on you, right? So the example I gave with Osmosis and Axelar, like the Axel token holders, whose token value would get damaged if your chain got attacked, right? The Axel token value would drop, like obviously if the Osmosis chain got hacked or attacked, the Osmo token value would collapse, right? But the Axel token value would also collapse because, once again, we are their biggest customer, right? And so you want to figure out, okay, so now that makes it so if you're an Axel token holder, you have high incentive to like not be malicious on the Osmosis chain. And then once you can do that, then the next step is see, what's the best bilateral treaty you can negotiate, right? You want to go to Axelar and say, hey, we'll let Axel tokens restake on Osmosis. They'll get Osmo staking rewards. That's more APR for your token. But in exchange, you have to let Osmo token holders also restake to help secure Axelar. And that way, Osmo token, we're giving up APR, yield on Osmo tokens by sharing it with Axel tokens, but we'll make up for it by you giving a portion of your Axel token yields to Osmo restakers. So then it kind of comes down to who you can negotiate, like DAO to DAO negotiations of security alliances.
Okay, I guess there's no further slides. So I just want to thank everyone for coming today. We'll obviously have another session tomorrow, and we will adjourn in a moment for the reception, which is being held downstairs on the first floor. But before you leave, I want to take one moment to shill another Columbia event. And that's going to be the TLDR conference that we're going to hold next spring, next May. This is the second iteration of the latest in a DeFi research conference. This is going to be oriented primarily around latest innovations in decentralized finance. Like the conference today, it's going to be a good mix of academics in addition to industry practitioners. You can find information at that website, and at the QR code, there is a link to sign up for email. We don't have the full information out yet. Probably in before the beginning of January, we'll release a call for papers, and there'll be more details about the conference release then. But I highly want to encourage you to attend, and if you are doing DeFi research, to submit your work for consideration. So I'll just leave that slide up, and with that, let's thank all the speakers today, and let's all meet downstairs. Thanks again.